Howdy, howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Urban Odyssey. I hope everybody is doing well today. We're going to kind of shift gears a bit. We're going to continue on the recap that we did in the last presentation. I was originally going to present this as like a second half of that, but I decided that I was just going to do that whole episode of review, and then I added a few extra topics of interest to this presentation. And so we're going to talk about generativity and the way by which things are created. Same principle, child, birth, creating a child, creating a human. But if you go into Webster's 1828, Webster's 1913 dictionary, you will find, if you look up commerce, the word commerce is defined as intercourse or sex, but it's the principle of generativity. So all this and more, guys, after the intro. Hang tight. Alrighty, guys, so this presentation was originally titled Cybernetic Alchemy, Code Machine, the Singularity and the Return of Magic. However, as I said at the beginning of the video, some of this was originally meant to recap the stuff we talked about in the last presentation, so keep that in mind. There are a lot of topics that will pop up again, but the focus today that we're going to be looking into, primarily to get us started, we're going to look at the text by Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. So I will begin the summary of this text. In this seminal work, Julian Jaynes, the author, investigates the enigmatic origin of human consciousness by first dismantling historical misconceptions that equate self-awareness with simple biological reactivity or associative learning. The text critiques various scientific and philosophical theories ranging from behaviorism to neurological reductionism, arguing that consciousness is not an inherent property of matter or all living protoplasm, but a specific metaphorical intracosm that emerged relatively recently in human history. Jaynes suggests that prior to this development, the human mind functioned in a bicameral, which means two houses, or two hemispheres. If you look at European government, they have a bicameral parliament, or their parliament has two houses, but bi means two and cameral means houses. So he proposes that the human mind, long ago, it functioned in a bicameral state where decision making was guided by auditory, as we would call them today, hallucinations, interpreted as the voices of gods rather than internal thought. By examining the breakdown of this bicameral mind through the lens of ancient literature and modern vestiges like schizophrenia, the author seeks to prove that consciousness is a learned, linguistically based breakthrough rather than a direct product of biological evolution. And I do want to give a shout out to the channel. I'm going to put a link in the the notes for the name of the channel is The Past 33 Years, but he did a video titled The Re-bicameralization of the Mind, and he was the way that I learned about this text. However, in putting this together, I've discovered that these principles are actually they pop up quite a bit within esotericism, within psychology, the conscious, the subconscious mind. It's a very similar distinction, but this channel is actually a slept-on channel. It's a true hidden gem. I love the art style that he does all of the illustrations and graphs in, and he talks about systems theory and elite theory, and it's been very interesting and has helped bring a lot of ideas to my mind, and just watching his content that I've used as inspiration to present in the various episodes that we've done. So definitely suggest checking this channel out. I'll put a link in the description in the notes. So starting with what consciousness is not. In our hyper-technical age, we treat consciousness as the very air we breathe, a self-evident intricosm that defines our humanity. Yet, Julian Jaynes' 1976 masterwork, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, suggests that what we call consciousness is not a biological necessity, but a relatively recent, culturally acquired skill. Our understanding of this secret theater is often obscured by the metaphors of our era. Historically, each age has modeled the mind after its most prominent technology. The Greeks saw it as an open space. The 19th century thinkers viewed it through the lens of geology, that being layers of the unconscious mind, or chemistry, compounds of sensations. And the Industrial Revolution gave us the steam engine model of repressed energy in the boiler room neuroses. Yeah, very interesting idea, because if you go back to medieval times, people believed that if you were angry, that would actually, if you lashed out, if you fed into that anger, it would actually make you more angry. This was the kind of the older belief. But when the steam engine, the Industrial Revolution, came around, so too did the term to blow off steam. The idea was that like a steam engine, if you let some steam out and reduce the pressure, perhaps instead of increasing or leading to more anger, it can actually reduce anger or just emotional pressure. It's a little bit of both, because the ancient understanding is right to some degree. There is truth to that, but then the steam engine model also has a lot of validity. So we're going to look here, the common myths here on the left, and then the Jaynesian reality on the right. So in terms of learning, first, this side, learning, consciousness is the required substrate for all learning. This is the common myth that we're looking at on this side first. In terms of performance, the common myth is that we must be conscious of our actions to perform them skillfully. Concepts in the common myth. Consciousness is the unique place where general concepts are formed. Thinking is the very heart and bone of conscious experience. Now, here on the right, the Jaynesian reality, the theories put forward in the worldview of Julian Jaynes, the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Learning, Pavlovian conditioning, and complex skill acquisition, like coin tossing, occur more efficiently through reactivity without conscious interference. Performance, complex tasks like playing the piano or sprinting are handled by automatic nervous processes. Conscious interference often causes a performer to trip up. It's very true. I do it sometimes when I'm streaming or making videos, not really for any lack of trying. It's actually just this idea that if you're thinking about, okay, I can't mess something up, or okay, I'm recording it, if I mess it up, then I have to edit it out or something. It's just that thought. And this is what we're really going to try to get into today. It's this, which is always overlooked. It's very overlooked, and that's what made me so intrigued with this subject. And we're going to build on it in later episodes with some grammar and language. We're going to go into that in other episodes, but it's almost like that idea, okay, I'm recording this presentation to upload as content, and I know what I want to say, I have things ready, but I can't make a mistake because I'm recording. If I say something wrong, I'm going to have to go and either edit it out and re-record it. It's just that thought. That thought does have weight, and it does affect your behavior. And that's kind of a hint at what we're going to get into in the next couple slides. In terms of concepts, in the Jaynesian reality, concepts are classes of behaviorally equivalent things. Such animals possess concepts. A bee's concept of a flower without subjective meta-awareness. And in terms of thinking, much of what we call thinking is an automatic, non-conscious, aptic structure of the nervous system, processing data below the threshold of the analog eye. Okay, so living in the bicameral state, the noble automaton. If the ancients were not conscious as we understand it, how did they navigate the complexities of burgeoning civilizations? Jaynes proposes the bicameral mind, and he's actually not the only one. We're going to look at that a little bit too. Bicameral mind, literally two-chambered, two houses, two chambers. A mental state where the gods took the place of internal volition. In this state, humans operated as noble automatons, reflexive machines governed by a split brain architecture. Stimulus response / reflexive behavior. Ancient humans did not decide in the modern sense. They reacted to environmental triggers and societal standard operating procedures through complex pre-programmed habits. Lack of internal will or volition. There was no private mental sandbox to weigh consequences. Action followed instruction directly, removing the agonizing burden of choice that defines modern anxiety. Adherence to hallucinated voices. The gods, they understood these to be the voices of the gods. In novel or stressful situations, the brain's right hemisphere generated auditory hallucinations. To the ancient person, this was the literal 100% certain voice of a god, king, or deceased ancestor. So a quote here from the text, quote, "The characters of the Iliad do not sit down and think out what they do, or think out what to do, my bad. They have no conscious mind such as we say we have. Again, this is from our perspective, our, modern worldview looking back. So to them, it is a god that grasps Achilles by his yellow hair and warns him not to strike Agamemnon. I think that's how you say it, Agamemnon. They were noble automatons who knew not what they did. My apologies. They were noble automatons who knew not what they did. And that's a quote from the book by Julian Jaynes. The double brain hemispheric lateralization. The bicameral system was a biological bridge. Jaynes and later the neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist, who authored the text The Master and His Emissary. And this is a great way to understand this dynamic between the two brain hemispheres. In the ancient world, these chambers functioned as a command and control system before being integrated into a holistic self. So a very basic way to sum this up without getting into all of the, the details and stuff like that. One half of your brain is responsible for taking in your 5 sensory inputs, taking in outside information. It's one half of the brain, it's about to tell us in the next slide, brings in the 5 senses, the external information, and its goal is to, from that information, to develop a question. But that question is to be a go or no go, a 1 or a 0. So one half of the brain creates this go or no go question. The other half of the brain decides yes or no. So let's see if I don't want to cross my wires. Yeah, so the left hemisphere here, this is the human, the emissary. The left hemisphere specializes in executive, execution, linear logic, and driver seat motor behavior. Neurochemistry, it's more reliant on dopamine. And the role of the left hemisphere, this is the emissary or the errand boy who carries out daily tasks and follows instructions. So think if you are perhaps working for some duke or baron, and they hold the position, they're the knight, but they will have an emissary. So they will write a letter, and now you go and you bring this letter to whoever I need you to bring it to. This is the dynamic that is happening between the left and the right hemisphere. So that's the left hemisphere. Now the right, this is the master. It specializes in holistic signal processing, pattern recognition, and broad spectrum data intake. It's more reliant on noradrenaline. This is a neurotransmitter, noradrenaline. Its role is the master who monitors the environment for novel threats and issues commands. So the right hemisphere will decide yes or no. The left hemisphere will figure out what the question is. Yes or no what? That's, you figure out the question from your sensory input. The other half of the brain, says yes or no, 1 or 0. And it's a binary system. And so that is the key point. It is a binary system. So the great manifestation. So I like this diagram here. And this is actually an older diagram. And it's based off of Bob Proctor's idea of how the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, embody the law of gender. Now, I know that's a hot debate now. So let's not talk about, human gender. Let's look at it very simple way. When, at least for the remainder of this video, when we refer to plus, that being male, the conscious mind, the will, or the subconscious mind, the passive, the receptive, the feminine, all I want you to think about is that masculine energy is straight, jagged lines. So think of a square. Feminine energy is smooth. It's like a circle or a curve. That's all. There's really nothing too crazy past that. So when we use those terms, that's a pretty good way to standardize it for the purposes of this video, this presentation right now. So the idea is that the conscious mind, this being the part of your mind that has about 20% of your brain power, is what you're aware of. It is the active, the masculine half of the mind. The mind manifests, this is the idea of the bicameral mind, the mind manifests the physical body and consciousness. The law of gender, the idea that you have an interplay of two polarities. You have a plus and a minus, and magnets have a plus and a minus. If you would like to understand this a different way, get a pair of jumper cables, hook them up to a car battery, and tap them together, and you will see a spark of electrical current. And it's the same idea. Because, again, that spark, when you touch the plus and the minus lead together, the black lead and the red lead, you get a spark. And that is what we're talking about here with the unification of male and female. And obviously, this is how human beings are created, through intercourse, through a male and a female coming together. They manifest, they create a new life. And this is not unique to humans. This is pretty much all living creatures, unless you're dealing with like bacteria or something like that. The subconscious mind is our link to the collective unconscious, what some have called God. The collective unconscious, this is seemingly something that is not local to one individual. So for instance, you have this term, a zeitgeist. A zeitgeist is kind of like a collective unconscious that's shared within a society, people who come from the same background. And so this idea is that we have the conscious mind, that we have about 20% of all of our brain power is going to the conscious mind. So the vast majority is in the feminine subconscious, and we're not aware of that. So it'll surface in your dreams, can surface with what people fixate on, etc. But the vast majority of our brain power is hypothetically connected to this collective unconscious, where archetypes, entities, thought forms, images, and symbolism reside. So if you look at the card 6 from the major arcana, the Lover's card, what you will notice is that the man is looking straight to the woman, and the woman is looking up to God. And so that is a good way to remember this dynamic. But again, we're going to actually focus on this a bit, because this is very important. This is the principle of generativity, seemingly as above, so below, on all levels, small and large. So I'm going to put a link to this video here. I'll play a few minutes of it, because we've got a few other clips to check out too, but I'll play a few minutes of it. Oh, one moment. Just got to get it ready to go. There we go.
Proctor back again. Now, you know, in the last video that we made here together, you know, I went through how the conscious mind works, how the subconscious, and how the body is an expression of the mind. And as you go through that, if you go through it a few times, you're going to see, yeah, that's exactly what happens. Now, I want you to think of this for a moment. When you impress an idea upon your subconscious mind, that alters the vibration of this instrument we call our body. See, our body is a molecular structure. Really what it is. It's a mass of energy in a very high speed of vibration. Now, we invented a word to describe our conscious awareness of vibration, and that word is feeling. If you ask a person, you know, how are you today? They'll say, well, I'm feeling fine, or I don't feel that good, I feel great. You never hear a person say, oh, I'm consciously aware of being emotionally involved with a negative idea, so therefore I've moved into a negative vibration. But that's exactly what happens. So, you see, as we start to understand this, and we become aware that we're not feeling too good, we can change it. Now, it takes a little training, but you can do it. We are really in charge of how we feel. Now, we let other people upset us, but we don't have to let other people upset us. We don't need to react to them. We can respond. We can listen to what they're saying, and they say, well, you're entitled to your opinion, but that's just not what I'm like. And we can hold our own idea of ourselves. You see, it's important that we grasp how the mind works and that we understand the relationship of the body to the mind and the mind to the body. Now, it's our results that we want to change. Now, our results could be in our physical body. It may want to be, you may want to cast off a few pounds. You may want to put on a couple of pounds. You may want to have a little higher energy. See, all the energy there ever was or ever will be is 100% evenly present in all places at the same time. Everything's energy. You know, you'll hear people say, where does he get all the energy? Where does she get all the... Nobody gets energy. Everybody releases energy. Desire is the triggering mechanism that, whoo, lets the energy flow. Now, let's go back and have a quick review. Here you've got the little stick person here. There you've got the conscious mind, and remember, you have the sensory factors hooked up to the conscious mind. And then you have the subconscious mind, and then you have the body. Now, the conscious mind has the ability to choose thoughts. Those thoughts turn into pictures. We turn the pictures over to the subconscious mind, and then the subconscious mind expresses the action, all right? Now, what is the problem? Remember, we said the subconscious mind had no ability to reject. We said the subconscious mind cannot differentiate between what's real and what's imagined. How did we arrive on the scene? I'll tell you. When you arrived on the scene, you did not have any conscious faculties developed. The sensory factors weren't even developed. This is how you arrived. That's called the little life. That's the baby. No conscious mind. So there's the subconscious mind. It's wide open. You can put anything in it. You see, your subconscious mind is programmed genetically. That's why we look like our relatives. It's built right into the genes at birth. But then we're programmed environmentally. Carl Mendinger from the Mendinger Foundation in Topeka one time said, environment is more important than heredity. Why do you think you speak the language you speak? You speak that language because you were surrounded by people that speak that language in your little life. And the language just went right into the subconscious mind. If you grew up in a home that was bilingual, you learned both languages. I had an associate over in Kuala Lumpur, had a little boy, he spoke 4 languages at 4 years of age. And you'd look at that and you'd say, my gosh. No, the baby was programmed. Why do you like the food you like? It's programming.
But just a little fun fact, in my high school psychology, I remember we had to do a summer project because it was like the AP version. We had to do these profiles on all of the major influences in psychology. I remember Proctor was one of them. I don't remember if he was the one who did the work on language acquisition, but children have literally their, when we're developing, our minds have a predisposition for learning a language. So if you have a child who's around a bunch of different languages, literally their brain, at least while they're young and in the formative years, has the ability to pick up information, but particularly language, very rapidly. And this goes away generally as a person gets older. It doesn't go away that they can't, pick it up. It just takes more time, like it would you or I. Okay, so I just did want to give a little preview of that. I hope that helps a little bit. So let's see, let's go ahead and bring everything back up here, and we will continue. There we go. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in the future is that behavior and really any type of generation isn't as simple as just, do it. It actually is a 4-step process, but this is so deep inside the mind. It's something we have done so much, like breathing. You don't have to do it consciously. You don't ever think about it. And this isn't taught. If it was, it would be called the trivium or the quadrivium. It's the same thing as to be or not to be. That's the question. Because to be one thing, if I'm green, well, a person who is green is absolutely not blue. Because if you're green, that means you're green and not blue. And so what happens here is I came across this book titled A Dictionary of Command Phrases. And if you were listening, Bob Proctor, in that little clip that we just listened to, he said that there was a trigger that allowed the energy to flow. And that is true. There is a behavioral trigger. And so in the case of our brain hemispheres, one hemisphere will bring in information from the 5 senses. Okay, that is step 1. Okay, the second step is that it has to condense all of that information down into a question. Should we do this or not? Basically, it's like, here's what's going on, here's what you're witnessing, here's what your senses are telling you. Do something or not. It's how your brain works. It's a binary signal. So the formulation of that yes or no question is step 2. Step 3 is for the other half of the brain to, make a decision, go or no go. And step 4 is you acting back out into your environment, where the process will then basically happen again, because you affect change outward into your immediate environment, and then you pick up sensory data from a second later, which is almost instantaneous. So this is a pseudo-computational process, which is what we've established, I think, pretty well during the series that we've done on cybernetics. So what is a command phrase? I'm bringing this up. I'll put a link to the text in the description, but I'm bringing this up now just to draw this comparison. It's going to come up in a later video. Let's see, let me get my pointer. So a command phrase is not merely a figure of speech. It is a literal string of executing code. And anybody, I don't know if I have anybody in my audience who is familiar with computer programming, not necessarily on an advanced level, just basic, but that's exactly what you're doing in programming with a if-else block. And I may actually maybe do that as a short little example so people understand this in a later episode. But if I do have anybody who understands or does program as a hobby or as a job, let me know. I'm curious to know if anybody in the audience is interested in that type of stuff. So Richard Wetherill discovered that people actively invite their own destruction by forming or adopting commands during moments of intense emotion. In a sudden, blinding flash of rebellious thinking, a concept is formed that instantly becomes the command phrase for a permanent distortion of logic. Every command phrase functions as a literal, programmatical if/then logic statement. It contains a specific statement of the command that must be obeyed, and it simultaneously states or implies the exact environmental triggers that call for that obedience. For example, the phrase, quote, "If I ever get the chance, I'll certainly take advantage of it," unquote. That is a command that forces the host to compulsively execute possibly predatory behavior whenever the opportunity arises. Almost immediately after creating this phrase, the victim completely forgets that they ever thought such words, burying the code deep into their unconscious, similar to a sigil, where it automates, because for the same reason that you are supposed to forget a sigil, it's because you're trying to get it into that subconscious mind. You have to kind of trick yourself to get it in there, because that is your firewall. Every single command phrase holds the seed of an ongoing self-inflicted punishment. So, let me clarify that. This phrase here, "if I ever get the chance, I'll certainly take advantage of it." Think of it like this. You're literally setting up an if-then block. So if I, the person thinking this, if the chance ever arises, I will then take advantage of it. If the chance arises, I will certainly take advantage of it. It's a command, but it's a command in such a way as when this time comes in the future, you will almost kind of think back to it like, well, here's my chance, I might as well do it. But what makes this so important is that actually when we witness something, so if you see something happen, and then you tell me, oh, this happened, you're making a claim. You are claiming that this is what you saw. Now, do you have evidence? Don't you? But were you telling the truth, or were you lying? It's a contractual term. Your claim is either resolved or it's rejected. And so behavior is generated using the same principle of generation, that being a kind of a fourfold process. And that is what I'm laying the groundwork for. We're going to cover this more in the future, but this is some kind of basic introduction. And I thought it made sense to cover the bicameral mind idea, because that's literally what's happening with this idea that consciousness comes out of the interplay between two hemispheres of the brain. Okay, I'll stop rambling because we've got some other interesting stuff to check out. Yeah, so if this thing ever happens to me, I'll take this course of action. It's programmatical. And that's why I was curious if we have any programmers in the audience. Yeah, so here's an if then else statement. So generally in programming, you have a variable, and a variable could be a string, it could be a number, it could be true or false. But you might say something like, oh, if this number is greater than 50, if this number is greater than 50, that's my condition. Okay, so then if it's true, if the condition is true, then we will do something. But if the condition is false, then we'll, do something else. So if it's true, take this course of action in the green. And if it's not true, take this course of action. That's an if-else statement. This is really the basis of all programming. You will find this paradigm here in all computer programming languages, and you will also find it as a perfect analogy in behavioral programming, conditioning. Okay, yeah, so the generative principle. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof." But when I was making these slides, I noticed, if you read things very carefully, which I've tried to make a habit out of, it says, and this is the Geneva Bible, which generally I tend to appreciate that one, but I don't think that there's only necessarily one translation that's right or wrong. I also like to look at the interlinear version with the Hebrew and the Greek. It's good to look at different versions and know what the differences are. But it says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Not the power of death and life are in the tongue. Rather, it says death and life, these two polar opposite things. Death and life, those two things are in the power of the tongue. So whatever the power of the tongue is, it's dual. Whatever this power is, it has plus and minus, or death and life. It's got this same binary. Okay, I did a video which I am actually pretty proud of. It's titled "The Absolute Key to Occult Science," and it's specifically about how you can find this pattern in all natural numbers. It's a really good video. I'm going to put a link to that, but I'm just going to summarize that this is actually the meaning of the Tetragrammaton. It's not, my name's Josh, my channel name's Urban. It's not a name like that. It's actually a code, and it's found in DNA. It's found in pretty much everything. I did that video about a year ago, and ever since then, the last year, I've just found the same principle pop up everywhere. So it's very important for a variety of reasons. Okay, so what you're looking at here, the generative principle, which is one of the things they tell Freemasons, the G at the top level, they say it stands for the generative principle. So it's fourfold. Yod, Hey, Vau, Hey. And this pops up in so many different places. You could look at it literally: procreation, man plus woman equals child. Now the child could be a boy or it could be a girl. So let's just say that it's not plus, it's not minus, it's just zero. It's in between, it's neutral. Okay. You also have Hegel's dialectic. You have problem, you have a reaction, you have a solution, then you have a resolution. You have fire, water, air, earth, the four elements. You have the state is the father role, the church is the mother role, the mob, that meaning the masses of people, is the neutral role, and those are the society, the nuclear society, the nuclear family. Photosynthesis follows this process. I've got notes on that somewhere else, but this is a process that's not just unique to this subject. You could pretty much find it anywhere 4 pops up. If you got 4 quadrants, chances are this is at least you can make the metaphor of this, I've found. So the active principle, this is the initiator, the positive charge. By that, it's a contract as well. I have an idea, and I will approach you and I will say, hey, would you like to help me with this great idea I have? I've made you an offer. I've extended outward to you an offer. So that would mean active initiator. Now, if you made me the offer, you would be the initiator. Whoever receives the offer, they have the opportunity to say, yeah, I'll do it with you, or no, I'm not going to do it with you. So they are in the receptive role where they've received an invitation that they can either accept or deny. Okay, so if you agree and you say, yeah, let's do it. Then you and I are, coming together, we're working together to bring something into being. We're going to build a new product, which means we're going to generate something. So it's pretty much the same principle. And then four would just be, okay, we create the product and here's how it changes the world, or here's if it sells and we, build a business out of it, etc. The active principle, the initiator of the positive charge, this is the raw seed. It's a seed of intent. The passive principle, the receptive field, the matrix, the storage medium that catches the seed. The neuter principle, the result of the union, the gestation, the dynamic equilibrium of the first two forces. And then the active manifestation, the final output, the entity born into the physical timeline, capable of further interaction. It's important to note 4 reduces down to 1. And so what would happen is that this would become the beginning and the thing would start over again. Again, please see the video that I did. It will put a lot of this into perspective, and it's actually quite beautiful in my opinion. The fourfold law dictates that nothing can exist in reality without passing through these 4 gates. Language and mental programming are bound by this absolute necessity. Yeah, so the Tetractys, this is a better visual example of why this is important. So let's look at 1. 1 is just the point, 0 dimension. So let's just say that is, I'm just existing. Okay, but then we go into to be or not to be. Well, if I'm being, if I am something, that means that there must be a state of not being something. Like I said earlier, if I'm blue, well, what is blue? Well, if you're blue, that means you can't be red or you can't be orange. It's this idea that if I am something, if I speak this out, that I am something, it would be valid in the response of somebody else to make this, to form this foundation. This is something that we have done so much we don't realize we're doing it. Okay, so you have a point that's 0 dimensions, and then that becomes a line. That's 1 dimension. To be or not to be. Well, if you can be or you cannot be, you then have distinction. That brings us into 2 dimensions. A point plus a point is a line. A point plus a line is a triangle. And then we go into the 3D with a tetrahedron when you take a point and a triangle. It gives you a 3D tetrahedron. And this is Pythagoras Tetractys. One of the most notable symbols associated with Pythagoras is certainly the famous Tetractys, which he describes as a symbol, immense and pure, source of nature and model of the gods. It is the sum of all Pythagorean teachings. So this idea here is that, think of, if you're doing tally, you're counting by tallies, or you have literally like sticks in your hand. To a primitive individual, somebody who might not have, probably didn't know how to read or write, when you're counting, you have to look at it from that perspective. So when the ancient people pondered and they said, well, what is 4? What is it really? What is this? What is 4? They understood that 4 would be manifest, or you would represent this idea of 4 by taking 1 stick. You throw 1 stick down on the ground. Okay, now I need to throw 2 sticks down on the ground, which means I've got three sticks are laying in the ground. Those 3 sticks there are laying in the ground. Okay, now I'm going to throw down 3 sticks. So that means now I've got 6 sticks on the ground. and then finally you would throw down 4 more sticks. And so they would see the Tetractys here. This is what 4 is. 4 is this triangle with 10 dots, because there are 4 dots there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, if you wanted to do this for, let's say, 7, well, you could just have a, rows to 7. Then you would do 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4. Same thing. You just sum all the numbers. This is called triangulation, theosophic addition. These are very interesting when you start to look into it. Nikola Tesla, modular arithmetic is very fascinating to me, at least. But if you have 10 dots here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, well, reduce 10. You add the digits. 1 plus 0 is 1. Oh, well, we got 1 again. Okay, start the whole thing over. Okay, 4 becomes 1, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and imagine this has 7 rows. 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. That's 28. It's 28. 8 plus 2 is 10. 1 plus 0 is 1. Reduce back to 1 again. This happens forever. 4 does this. 7, 10, 13, 16. This goes on forever. Commerce, intercourse. This here is from Webster's 1913. Both are. Commerce is defined as the exchange or buying and selling of commodities, the exchange of merchandise on a large scale between different places or communities. Social intercourse, the dealings of one person or class in society with another. Familiarity. Or 3, sexual intercourse. Okay, so what is intercourse? A reciprocal right on neighboring lands, 1. A running between, to run between. And as far as I understand, that implies 2. If there's you and me, somebody can run between the 2 of us. But it's not necessarily between when you're dealing with 3. So intercourse implies a binary dynamic. Exchange between 2 people, to communities, to societies, whatever. Yeah, so language generates factual occurrences. We're going to look more into this later. David Wynn Miller's quantum grammar system is very fascinating. While it's been associated with legality, and I'm not necessarily knocking it yes or no in that, but I'm more interested particularly in the language. I think what he had developed trying to reveal this dynamic in language is fascinating. Now, does that mean you will have success with it in a legal case? I don't know. I'm not I don't practice law. I'm not in that. God forbid, I don't want to have to ever go into a courtroom again in my life. So, but in terms of language, what's going on here is that your language works the same way. First, you have to have a cause. Second, you have to have, let me put that a different way. Imagine that you just going on about your day, and you witness something happen. That is a communication to you. Now, when you try to communicate that to somebody else, as I said, you're making a claim. You come to me, I wasn't there, you tell me this is what I saw. And so you are claiming, I saw this happen. Okay, so basically, if you look at it from that idea of a contractual idea of did it happen or didn't it? Okay, so now I'm going to go and I'm going to, find evidence or ask other people, and I'm going to say, did it happen or didn't it? So the resolution of that contract would be what we call either you lied to me or you didn't. You promised me that you saw this. Okay, well, no, now you're lying. This is taking place whenever somebody has this argument, which we would see this normally. People argue all the time, no big deal about that, but actually this is analogous, perfectly analogous to a claim and a contract. So first, the cause. When a sovereign human being creates a true fact, a living contract, or a breath fragment contract, as we talked about with the Breath Wars series that we did, James Carner and I, the biocomputer executes the same process. So first, manufacture or the cause. David Wynn Miller defines this as one in his numerical syntax system. For the cause, the witnessing fact. This is actually the gravity. Yeah, let me catch the gravity of this situation real quick. Something bad happens. Oh man, the gravity of this situation is just crazy. That's a figure of speech that I've heard it a bit, but it's not too common anymore. Okay, so one here, a for the cause, a witnessing fact. So when you would say for the cause, that's what he means. For the boy, for Urban Odyssey, you're saying it's a witnessing fact. For this thing that I have witnessed. Second, the data must be received, storage, this is labor delivery. The data must be received and gestated. David Wynn Miller, DWM, David Wynn Miller, the guy who created this. So when you see DWM, that's what it means. He defines this as the numerical weight 2 of the consequence. This is the storage capacity of the learning, the organization knowledge. So for the boy of the village, for the boy of the village, that would be an example of step 1, step 2. Okay, step 3, this is the product of the motion. This is the motion of the sentence. The data and the storage unite to form an integral energetic reaction. David Wynn Miller defines this as 3, the is/are verb thinking, as the knowledge put into motion. So in terms of verbs, is would be singular, are would be plural. For the boy of the village is/are, if you were talking about plural. For the boy of the village is, for the boy of the village is with the tribe. That would be a basic example. Finally, the final gate 4 here, the manifestation. This is your claim. The thought is born into the physical world as a sovereign claim. David Wynn Miller defines this as 4, with the possessive, with the claim. Through this fourfold process, the human mind literally impregnates the fabric of space-time, giving birth to a physical consequence. This is the command phrase. That's why I presented that first and put this here. It's literally the same idea. It's programming. So let me go through these again. First, for the cause, your witnessing fact. Step 2, of the consequence, storage capacity of the learning. Step 3, those unite to form an internal energetic reaction. This is the is/are verb thinking, as the knowledge put into motion. 4, the thought is born into the physical world as a sovereign claim. This is with the possessive. So for the cause of the consequence is with the possessive, or with the claim. For the cause of the consequence is with the claim. Because what happens if I just said something like the cause is with the claim? You could say back to me, you could say, which cause? Which claim? There's ambiguity. There's a bit of fine detail that was, lost in my communication to you. You lost some of the detail in that transaction. And so what is going on in this system, and we're not going to cover it beyond this here. That'll be in a different episode. Trying to remove that ambiguity, and also trying to remove, talking about something happening in the future or the past, because you and I have never lived in the past or the future. Every single second that you and I have been alive, we've always lived in right now. There's never been a time in your life where you have lived in a different time than now. It's always been right now. So, command phrases, the active seed. This is an intense emotional shock or trauma that penetrates the biocomputer's defenses. The passive receptacle, the host mind momentarily drops the firewall, receiving the command. It goes into the subconscious. If I ever get the chance, that was the example we used. Gestation, the distortion of logic. The seed and the mind fuse, creating a hidden child, a neurological short circuit or compulsion. Manifestation, the host blindly obeys in the future the command, birthing the destructive behavior or habit into reality over and over again, holding the seed of a punishment that continues indefinitely. We've talked about Gestalt because whereas modern cybernetic, thinkers who wrote all of the feedback loops, Norbert Wiener, Ashby, all of these different people, their idea is that the materialist view is all that there is. They believe that, the human biocomputer is just, you throw all the body parts together and that's it. You put a heart and two kidneys and some arms and legs and whatever, you put that together, that's a human biocomputer. Whereas my perspective is this word Gestalt, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And a lot of the stuff that I've presented to you in this today is stuff that I revisited, interestingly enough, from my time in psychology, which was one of my favorite classes. So I did learn this word, Gestalt. In the occult architecture of the matrix, a Gestalt refers to the whole-making principle, where a structure or system becomes greater than the sum of its individual parts, rather than a mere psychological concept of perception. It is the primary necromantic mechanism used to forge an egregor, a collective group mind or autonomous psychic entity generated by the synchronized thoughts of a population. This esoteric concept of the Gestalt serves as the exact spiritual foundation for the body corporate, by legally, socially, and spiritually binding human beings into a corporate fiction or globalist collective. The cryptocracy absorbs individual divine sparks into a massive artificial group soul, which New Age architects blasphemously define as the Gestalt quality of the whole of being. Once a human collective is successfully fused into a Gestalt, the resulting synergistic energy produces a zeitgeist, a spirit of the time that mimics the unified power of a rampaging crowd. Within the esoteric hierarchy, these massive collective energy fields are actively manipulated by and classified as principalities and powers. Principalities are ruling spiritual entities that govern specific geographical, political, or social domains, feeding directly off of the quote-unquote school spirit. I put that there because in the way that you would, somebody would say a school spirit. Well, what is that? School spirit this is the energy that your school, your team, whatever has. It's the energy of the whole group together. That is the context. That is the way that I have come to understand the term spirit. So the breath of life that we, God breathes in to us, and man becomes a soul. So you don't have a soul, you are a soul. You are a soul, and you only become a soul once you are given an animating force, the breath. That's what the breath is. So when you have an animating force, what gets you going? What gets your energy going? You go to a high school football game. That's why the analogy school spirit makes sense, because if you go to a high school football game, there is almost a definitive personality of the group, and this is what a mascot is. Okay, so a mascot is supposed to be your representative in a caricature manner. It's supposed to be representative of what this school or this team is, what their energy is. So if you have a person who's only making money motivates them, the only thing that they get up out of bed every day for is to go to the bar, go to the strip club, get money, whatever. That is an animating force. That's what drives you to do things. Also, peer pressure and collective emotion are tied to this concept, generated by the group. Because if principalities don't have breath, because they need to get it from God, and obviously they don't have it, they have to steal it. They have to influence us to give it to them consensually. And so basically you have to have a group dynamic, because evil is defined privation by, it's defined only by what it lacks, and because of that it has to influence people, and influence only works in a group. Therefore, to form a Gestalt or a body corporate, to bring together a corporation and have departments that function like organs, you have a heart and kidneys, and a body corporate has a human resources department, has a operations department. It is to perform a macro level ritual that summons a principality to possess, manipulate, and definitively govern a unified human hive. The human biocomputer possesses stored program properties. This is called a state. A stored program is simply a set of instructions placed directly into the memory storage system of the brain, which strictly controls the organism. Whenever an internal or external activator gives the order for that program to run. The modern cybernetic perspective argues that the mind itself is defined purely as the sum total of all the programs and metaprograms operating within the machine. And as I said, this is where I don't fundamentally agree with the cybernetic perspective. I think that the whole is actually greater than the sum of its parts, whereas cybernetic perspective is that it's just the sum of its parts. And that's what I wrote here. Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that examines the human mind and behavior as a unified whole rather than a collection of isolated parts. It argues that the human brain naturally organizes sensory data into complete recognizable patterns and configurations, summarized by the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. 20th century in Germany, Gestalt, form, shape, or pattern is what it means in German. And we're going to look at those. I've got visuals for those. Yeah, so specifically in psychology, it talks about how, you can perceive based on how these patterns are arranged. You see the little square there. It talks about how that has to do with Gestalt psychology. But I think the implications of the word are what I was interested in for this presentation. So this is very interesting. I found this video. This video is actually was the one that I was shown in psychology. It's very fascinating. The corpus callosum is actually right here in the middle of your two brain hemispheres, and it connects them. So your left hemisphere of your brain and your right hemisphere communicate through this little connective tissue. It's called the corpus callosum. Now, if people have severe like grand mal seizures, there was a historic practice in extreme cases. This was very uncommon. It does happen, but it's not something that happens a lot. So if somebody has really bad seizures, sometimes they will actually sever this connection, and the person does go on to live a normal life, but they get these little weird side effects, and we're going to watch that. But if a person has really bad seizures, the idea is that you would cut the connection so that one half of the brain seizes out and the other half is free to respond. Because if you have it connected with the, a seizure is kind of like an electrical overload. And so if you have that connective tissue, it'll get to both hemispheres of the brain. For somebody who lives alone, they would be then not able to respond. Okay, so yeah, we're going to look at this video because this was actually the one that I remember watching. I was actually really happy that I found it. So let me go ahead and fix everything up. One moment.
We began our journey into the human brain here on the campus of Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. I'd come to meet one of the world's leading brain scientists, Mike Gazzaniga, and a man he's worked with for over a decade. A man with two brains. You've been working a long time with Dr. Gazzaniga?
14 or 15 years.
It doesn't seem like that long, does it?
The collaboration began when Joe had surgery. And you had this procedure to correct an epileptic problem,
yes.
Is that right?
Trying to stop the seizures. I was having seizures like every day or so, or sometimes 2 or 3 a day.
To control Joe's epileptic seizures, a surgeon severed the connection between the two halves of his brain. Cutting the corpus callosum like this prevented the spread of the electric storms that caused his seizures. But it also prevented the left and right halves of his brain from communicating with each other. In the years since the operation, Joe's epilepsy has been under control. He now earns a living at an egg farm, and in his everyday life, he's largely unaffected by the fact that his left and his right brains work independently. Do you feel any different when you think about something than you did, any differently from the way you felt before the procedure?
It's just got a backup brain, that's all.
That's something everybody could use, right? I found out how true that was right away when I was asked to draw a different shape with each hand. In a brain like mine, roughly speaking normal, at least all in one piece, the left half of my brain controls the right side of my body, while the right brain controls the...
Yeah, that's your kind of the important thing to remember, and I probably should have said that at the beginning. For those of you who don't know, the hemispheres of your brain are crisscrossed. So your left brain hemisphere controls the right side of your body. I believe speech is on the left. I think that's the case. But yeah, the right hemisphere is responsible for the left, your left side of your body.
The left side.
Oh, no.
But because the two halves are connected,
Nothing wrong with that.
getting each hand to work independently isn't easy.
Well, we were saying that the fact that Alan's hemispheres are connected, and that the motor messages from one are confusing the motor messages in the other.
I was just drawing an upside-down duck. Okay.
But when Joe is given the same task, his two hands operate as if controlled by two separate brains. What's happening is that each half of Joe's brain is given a separate instruction. He's asked to fix his eyes on the cross in the center of the screen. Anything flashed to the right of the cross goes only to his left hemisphere. Things to the left go to his right hemisphere. Because the two don't communicate, each hand does only what its half of the brain sees.
Wow, look at that. It's really like two different people doing the same.
That's right.
Same task.
That's the idea.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hands out in front
In
of
an
you.
experiment that's now a classic in brain research,
Hemisphere.
Mike Gazzaniga over 30 years ago used a similar setup to find out if the two halves of the brain are specialized to do different things.
Ship.
Joe is being flashed a word only to one half of his brain. Words flashed to the right
Storm.
are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Piano.
Good.
But when a word is flashed to his right brain,
Didn't see that.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand.
They got me lost.
Why don't you try drawing another picture of it over here if that will help you.
Oh, phone.
Oh, okay.
Durr.
It's almost as though somebody has given him a secret communication.
That's
and
right.
Now he knows that it's a telephone. But up until then, he was blind to it.
Exactly.
When Gazzaniga first did this experiment, it instantly proved that the ability to speak resides almost exclusively in the left hemisphere. Not until he sees what his right brain is drawing is Joe able to name
He
it.
said church, didn't he?
After looking at the picture.
Yeah, but he had to figure it out about as long as we did. That's really interesting. It's a picture here of somebody communicating almost with another person.
And the communication is not occurring inside the head, it's occurring out on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Blob. Really don't know.
You want to draw a little bit more?
So far, Joe has been seeing only one word.
Cat. That's a cat
Things get
sound.
even stranger when he's flashed two words, each to only one half of his brain.
The right hemisphere saw toad. And
And so his left hand draws a toad.
So there's the toad.
Oh, it's a toad, right?
And this time I was able to guess what was coming.
Will
Now-
they put a little three-legged stool in there later, or what?
Joe's speaking left brain saw a stool. Saying the word lets the hand that's controlled by his right brain in on the secret.
That's great. That's really interesting. And if he had seen that with the Corpus Callosum intact, he would have drawn
Right.
a toadstool.
Right.
Not a toad and a stool.
Right, exactly the point. I've been doing this for 35 years. Yeah?
And
It gets me every time.
Yeah, it must. It
This
must.
time, instead of naming the word, I want you to point to the word.
Again, Joe sees two words simultaneously. Bell goes to his non-speaking right brain. Music to his speaking left brain. When asked to point to a picture of what he saw, he chooses Bell. But when asked
Yeah,
why,
why'd you pick that one?
Use it.
Music?
and when asked to
A lot of music
explain,
up there.
There was music and bell, and it was a few minutes ago. Last time I heard any music was coming from the bells out here,
Uh-huh.
banging away.
The bell's
Yeah.
outside here.
So, look good enough answer to me.
What's extraordinary is that Joe's speaking left brain concocts a plausible story of why he pointed the bell, even when some of the other pictures more obviously represent music. Gazzaniga believes this determination to find cause and effect, this desire to explain, is the left hemisphere's most marvelous property.
One of the unique things to the human brain is this need to interpret why two events occurred. What was the antecedent to this? What caused this? And if you can imagine that a species like us that has that little chip in its brain that asks those questions is going to survive rather well, because it's going to figure out more about the nature of the world than a species that doesn't have that.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hand.
But as I was about to discover, the right brain has a very useful survival skill all its own.
What do you think will happen here?
So for you, we're doing a live experiment. Never done it before.
The experiment involves the 16th century Italian painter Arcimboldo, who made faces out of fruit, flowers, meat, even books. From other research, there's reason to believe that the ability to recognize faces is located exclusively in the right hemisphere. So Mike wondered if Arcimboldo's paintings would look different to each of Joe's two brains.
So will his left hemisphere say, I saw a potato, I didn't see a face? And will his right hemisphere say, I saw the face, and not comment on the fact it was made out of a potato?
You're going to see a figure followed by a choice of two words.
If this works, it'll be terrific, but we'll see. So here it is, live.
Okay?
The first painting goes to the right hemisphere. And Joe points to face.
Down.
The next painting goes to his left brain. And this time he points to fruits. Mike seemed pleased.
Are you having a moment?
This is too good.
Again to the right brain, and Joe sees it as a face.
Point it down.
But to the left brain,
Face made out of books.
Point it up.
Put it in books.
Are you happy with what you're
Fruit.
seeing?
It's unbelievable. He's doing it. You see that?
It's good. It's going so fast. It's shifting from left to right so fast. I can't keep up with you. You're used to looking at this.
When you show him a face in the right side, the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
he's focusing in on the elements that made up the face.
Yeah.
When you show him the exact same picture in the left field, going to the right hemisphere, he's focusing on the face and not the elements.
And not the elements. If you came down from another planet and you saw faces and vegetables, you might not think there was much of a difference among them. But the brain seems to be made up in a certain way to say faces are very different from other objects.
That's right.
And one side of the brain specializes in faces. huh?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It is an adaptation that we have to detect upright faces. It's a very important. You can imagine in an evolutionary time that all of a sudden you have the ability to detect quickly an upright face. You want to read the expression on that face. You want to know if it's friend or foe. You want to have a set of questions about that face.
the right brain might be skilled at recognizing faces. But when it comes to what gives the human mind its power, the ability to reason, to invent, to interpret the world around it, Mike Gazzaniga's 30 years of research has taught him which hemisphere he wouldn't want to be without.
The old phrase around our lab is, don't leave home without your left hemisphere. That's where the action is.
All right, yeah, so definitely one of the most mind-blowing things that I remembered from psychology. We actually learned a lot of, or we saw like a lot of cool little videos like that. But that one definitely is memorable, especially because, you know, that was like 10 minutes, but there's all kinds of just other little experiments that they can do that are very, you know, they shed a lot of light. They set up these little dynamics that would probably not arise. Like you probably wouldn't have a reason to, you know, test somebody in that way, and unless they had this surgery. And I'm not 100% sure on if this is a thing that they still do, how often they do it. I'll have to look into that. But yeah, it's really interesting. Okay. Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people who are watching this have heard of binaural beats and hemispheric synchronization. The same idea makes it worth mentioning here. The way that hemispheric synchronization, which is a patented, somebody has created that and put a trademark or whatever on it, but the process is just simple. You take one tone, such as, let's see, what does it say here, 250 hertz into like the left ear, then you could do 260 hertz in the right. So that's a difference of 10 hertz. And what your brain does is, assuming that you do have your corpus callosum still, it will actually filter out that difference. And so you will hear a reverberation of about 10 hertz. This is how the gateway process and astral projection, that's how all of it works. That is the way that it is done. It's just very interesting and worth mentioning, especially in the context of the Corpus Callosum video we just watched. How language built the mind. As societal complexity reached a breaking point, driven by agriculture, large-scale settlements, and the need for long-term enduring tasks, the bicameral system collapsed. The voices fell silent, leaving humans feeling forsaken. To survive, the brain used language as computer code to recursively update its own operating system, creating an internal mental space. Jaynes, the author of the text that we're talking about, details this through the term metaphren and metaphere. The metaphren and metaphere model. The metaphren is the unknown or novel thing that we wish to describe, the multiplicand. The metaphere is a familiar thing used to describe the novel thing. This is the multiplier. Paraphors and paraphins, the associations or metadata associated to the metaphere that project back onto the metaphren. So here's an example using a snow blanket. To describe how snow covers the ground, the metaphren, we use the word blanket, the metaphere. The paraphors of a blanket include warmth, protection, and slumber. These paraphrens then project onto the snow, changing how we feel and react to the literal weather, effectively social engineering our internal perception of reality. So, same idea as what we're going to get into in a future video when we go deeper into quantum syntax. Same idea. We're looking at command phrases, we're looking at the bicameral mind, then we're looking at quantum grammar, and they're all showing us a very pretty much the same thing, just from different viewpoints and perspectives. The modern self, the re-bicameralization in AI cybernetic loops. Architecture of the modern self. Modern consciousness is defined by specific features that replaced the externalized voices of the gods. These are the tools we use to maintain a sovereign self in a chaotic world. Spatialization. This is the creation of an internal mental sandbox where we can move metaphors around. Crucially, this includes the spatialization of time, allowing us to perceive a past, present, and future rather than living in an internal now. So somebody told me once, and it's just one of those things I haven't forgotten. Somebody told me that silence is where your thoughts occur, or rather, it is the location in which your thoughts are located. It's like a stage. So that would basically be this mental sandbox in a way. Because if you pay attention to me, you're giving me, access to put concepts and ideas on to your personal mental stage of silence. Excerption, a lossy filter or parsing function. Because we cannot process all sensory data, consciousness excerpts relevant signals, acting as a spotlight that ignores entropic noise to find order. That's that 20-25% in the conscious brain, as opposed to like 80% in the subconscious. The analog I and the metaphorical me. The analog I is our virtual test dummy. We move through our imagination to test outcomes before acting. The metaphorical me is our ability to see ourselves as an object in the world, which is an autoscopic image. Narratization, the act of assigning causes to our behavior to create a cohesive life story. We narratize our actions to make sense of who we are, even if the reasons we invent are mere rationalizations. Re-bicameralization and the AI cybernetic loop. We are currently witnessing a re-bicameralization of the mind. As we outsource our cognitive functions to algorithms, we risk returning to a state of reflexive stimulus response. This regression is accelerated by a dopamine roller coaster that privileges the analytical left hemisphere while hobbling the intuitive right. The loss of literacy for Gen Alpha and others who may never master deep learning or writing. It's not looking good currently. The ability to narratize and maintain an analog I atrophies. The rally car metaphor. In modern human AI interaction, the AI acts as the co-driver, the master/God voice, providing precise instructions, while the human acts merely as the driver, the emissary, who executes commands without introspection. The auto prompt. By accepting algorithmically generated suggestions, we lose our auto prompt divergence. Our thoughts become injection molded parts, homogenized by a silicon-based external God. How to reclaim the analog I. The analog I is a fragile cultural invention, not a biological guarantee. It is the virtual space, the silence where freedom of will resides, and it is currently under siege by the entropy of algorithmic noise. To remain sovereign, we must resist the path of least resistance, the local minimum of the autoprompt. Maintain autoprompt divergence. Actively refuse the easy path of pre-generated AI responses. Force your mind to construct original syntax to preserve your unique semantic toolkit. Engage with the long tail. Seek out long tail distribution content. Analog books, preferably paper, preferably from before the internet age, written before the era of digital homogenization. It's been pretty much my focus for the last couple of years. This protects your internal digentropy from the semantic echo chamber. Cultivate internal digentropy. Protect your spotlight of attention, your silence. Protect your peace. Identify mock signals and emotional vampires that seek to maximize your mental disorder. Focus on signal over noise to keep your mental sandbox expanding. And we're going to wrap up with a video, a short little clip from Michelle Gibson, where she talks about this idea of cities as circuit boards, because she was able to find repeating patterns in various different cities around the world, not just the United States. So let's see, let me go ahead and play that clip for everybody. One moment.
The next components of circuit board Earth that I'm going to look at are, well, circuits. In one of the series that I did on researching places viewers made in comments, I discovered airports having racing tracks in angular relationships short distances away. I first noticed this when I was doing research on the Shepherd's Bush district of West London based on a commenter's suggestion. In the process of doing that, I realized I had seen the same angular relationship between London's Heathrow Airport and Shepherd's Bush on the top left, where there had been a huge track at one time in White City that had been used in later years for greyhound racing, and in my own research of the Tampa, Florida neighborhood of Sulphur Springs last summer, when I had noticed that the Tampa International Airport and the Sulphur Springs neighborhood in Tampa, Florida, where there was a greyhound racing track, had the same angular relationship. After I made that initial connection, commenters left other examples of the same kind of relationship between airports and racing tracks, past and present, including but not limited to places like Montreal, Quebec, Canada on the top right, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on the middle left, Toronto, Ontario, Canada in the middle, Los Angeles, California on the middle right, and Sydney, Australia on the bottom. In addition to airports and racetracks, I am also finding things like railroad yards, professional sports complexes, star forts, and even amusement parks with the similar characteristics and relationships to each other that I'm finding in different cities around the world. In these Google Earth screenshots, all the lines drawn go through or to professional sports complexes and rail yards in Toronto, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. I have long wondered about a connection between athletic fields to the Earth's grid system since finding ball fields sandwiched between a star fort called Fort Negley and the railroad yards in Nashville, and the direct connection of railroads to star forts when I found the former location of the Fort of Pensacola on the bottom right. And this map shows its previous location with rail yards just below the former location of the Fort of Pensacola, the layout of which immediately reminded me of circuit board diagrams. More upcoming on rail lines of all kinds. I think ellipses, being used as racing tracks, were once components of the circuitry of the Earth's electromagnetic grid system. The sport of racing uses the word circuit in the following ways: the course over which races are won, the number of times the racers go around the track, an established itinerary of racing events involving public performance. And in bicycle racing, a circuit race is a mass start road cycle race that consists of several laps of a closed circuit, where the length of the lap is slightly longer each time. Electrical circuit definitions include a closed path in which electrons from a voltage or current source flow, and includes devices that give energy to the charged particles the current is comprised of, such as batteries and generators. Devices that use current, like lamps, electric motors, and computers. And the connecting wires or transmission lines. An electronic circuit is a complete course of conductors through which current can travel and provides a path for current to flow. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the largest sports venue in the world and said to have been constructed in 1909. Check this out: Vatican City, the Wimbledon campus, the Roman Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, Yankee Stadium, and the Kentucky Derby all fit inside the automobile racing circuit. Wouldn't it stand to reason that those behind the reset when setting up the New World would take advantage of the superscience of the different types of circuits in the Earth's grid system?
Yeah, I love the work that Michelle Gibson has done. I'll put a link to her channel and also the 2 interviews that she and I have done together in the description. I highly recommend seeing the stuff that she has done. She's done a lot of content over the last probably like 10 years. It's really, really great stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this, because what we're looking at here is called a functional isomorphism. So in the strictest cybernetic terms, isomorphic, it means literally similar in pattern. Two dynamic systems are functionally isomorphic when, despite being composed of entirely different physical materials, their underlying operational logic and behavioral trajectories are perfectly mathematically identical. If the canonical representations of two machines can be converted into one another by a simple one-to-one mathematical transformation of their states, they are functionally isomorphic. It means that if you supply the exact same sequence of inputs to both systems, they will produce the exact same sequence of outputs. From the perspective of control, the two machines are indistinguishable. So by duplicating exact angles, distances, and configurations of specific infrastructure, such as airports or racetracks, within city layouts, civil engineers create functional isomorphisms and operative images that standardize human behavior and information processing. So more on that, and we're going to finish everything up. Isomorphism. W. Ross Ashby, who is a cybernetics author, researcher, defines isomorphism as a similarity in pattern where relationships in one system, such as a racetrack or airport, occur unchanged in another, like a street layout. So if two dynamic systems are adjusted to match physically or mathematically, they display a functional identity, where their outputs will be identical given the same inputs. By duplicating the geometry of a high efficiency or high flow system like an airport, civil engineers essentially create a machine that forces the human components within it to behave with the same specific constraints and flow patterns. Remember, we talked about flow control, like packets. Operative images. Norbert Wiener distinguishes between pictorial images and operative images. An operative image performs the functions of the original and can replace it in action. Duplicating a configuration creates an operative image that processes messages such as traffic, people, or data in a predictable machine-like manner. Geometric metaphor. Stan Tenen, who's another author, notes that geometry models self-organizing processes, and that specific geometric constellations articulate universal systems. Duplicating these angles would be an attempt to align the city with specific self-organizing principles or geometric metaphors that dictate flow and stability. The environment as external circuitry. Gregory Bateson argued that the mind is not bounded by the skin, but extends into the environment, which was a lot of that idea behind a collective subconscious, that somehow, some way, it's up to, we can theorize, but the idea is that, well, we're all individuals consciously. It may be possible that in some way our subconscious minds have, let's just say, more power over the environment. Perhaps we can have an extra bit of communication, either through, body language or nonverbal cues or something like that. But yeah, the system that thinks and processes information is the total circuit, including the man, his tools, and his surroundings. Literally, you have to have those things. You can't have a circuit unless you have the man, his tools, and his surroundings. Now, That's 3, but the circuit itself is 4, going with our law of 4. So completing the circuit, just as a blind man's cane is part of his sensory circuit, a city's layout is part of their residents' mental processing. Restraint and guidance. Civil engineering provides the restraints, the clues, information that guide behavior. Just as a jigsaw puzzle's shape restricts where a piece can go, the physical layout restricts human movement and interaction, reducing the need for conscious choice and creating a redundant, predictable universe. Imprinting and behavioral determinism. Robert Anton Wilson and Jose Delgado emphasize that the environment programs the brain. Imprinting the reality tunnel. Wilson states that the time-binding semantic circuit is imprinted by human artifacts and symbol systems. Civil engineering creates the social reality tunnel inside of which the domesticated primate lives. Replacing nature with machines. Delgado, Jose Delgado, wrote the book The Evolution of Man Towards a Psychocivilized Society. I believe that was the one he wrote. He wrote, if that's not the one, I know that he was on the Temple of Set reading list, which we covered a good couple episodes ago at the beginning of the Cybernetics series. That Temple of Set, Michael Aquino was having all of his initiates read stuff like this. This is what they were reading. They weren't reading, what you might imagine. They're actually reading Cybernetics and Psychocivilized Society and Metropolis and Man as a Machine, basically. So Delgado argues that civilization has replaced the natural environment with buildings and machines as the main determinants of behavior. The environment provides the sensory inputs that the brain must interpret. Therefore, controlling the physical layout is a method of modulating the inputs to the human biocomputer. And to sum everything up, we're going to leave off here, and we're going to pick up in the next episode, or the next presentation I do after this, because this actually went a little bit longer than I initially planned, but part of that was because I was rambling a lot. Guys, please do, if there's anything that you would like me to clarify, or perhaps something that you think I went through too fast, please let me know, because I would like to revisit, or at least kind of jot that down as a note so we can clarify that the next time around, because as you've noticed, these subjects have built on each other. A lot of it was because I wanted to plan that way, and because I was finding more texts that were listed as citations in the ones that I was using before. But some of it actually is interesting to me, because a lot of this stuff just seems to kind of fall in place. I'll learn and then present to the audience, and I'll learn something new having presented it. Then I'll go find more information that gives me something like I'm presenting now. So it's very interesting. I think there's a lot of fascinating insight to be gained for how the human mind works just through the study of cybernetics. So the economy of processing, habit formation. A standardized, duplicated layout serves the economics of flexibility within the biocomputer. Reducing computation. Bateson and Ashby note that habit is a way of sinking knowledge into the unconscious to save mental energy. By duplicating standard configurations like standardized airport terminals or road angles, The environment allows the human biocomputer to operate on autopilot, treating the environment as a hard program constant rather than a variable requiring fresh computation. And predictability. The goal of cybernetics is control and communication, and to steer these things. Cybernetics, the word cybernetics, it comes from a root in Greek. It means the steermanship, to steer, to kind of conduct, to steer a ship. It's the root of the word. So a standardized environment increases redundancy, which allows the observer or ruler to predict the missing parts of a message or behavior pattern with better than random success. Okay, so yeah, that I think is probably the part that we're going to leave off at now, because the next part that we do, we're going to probably talk specifically about the grammar, and wherever that takes us. It's not necessarily complex or hard. I just want to be able to have a visual for everybody, and so I do have a visual, and I will give everybody who made it to the end of the video a little sneak preview of that, because I think this will come in handy. So yeah, let me give you guys a sneak preview. One moment. Yeah, so this was, I used Gemini to build this, and actually turned out very, very well. I gave it all of the notes I had and brainstormed, and it helped me build a visualization tool for this grammar. So, for instance, let's see, I need to zoom in. So you can load a coherent state. What we're doing here is we're actually looking at how, we're overlaying it with qubits and error correction codes, because it kind of works like that. So 5, 6, 7 here, this little bit that's highlighted, this is the optimal format for a claim. 5, 6, 7 for the bridge, that's stable. Is a connector. Is and are, those are verb connectors. For the bridge is. Over the river. For the river is under the bridge. The interesting point is that it has to, that's actually an error. So ignore that red text right there. That's actually a bug that I have to fix. Everything's actually good to go right now. So you have to go forward. So on the top row here, 5, 6, 7, 2, 5, all the way to the right. But then you have to be symmetric, called a palindrome. Basically, this is like DNA. That's why DNA has the double helix. It's because it is doing this. And so it has to check backwards. You have to be able to read the same thing backwards. So for the bridge is over the river. For the river is under the bridge. So you can read it, forward and backwards. And so I built, with the help of Gemini and notes that I've compiled, and kind of figured out how to get something that I think I can present to people. It's done very well. So we're going to talk about this in detail. And it's been very fascinating to me. Stuff's very, very fascinating, because nobody's thought to connect this quantum grammar and language, or quantum grammar and cybernetics programming and stuff like that. So we're going to look at that in the next presentation in a few days probably. Questions, comments, concerns, please, I'm eager to hear from all of the viewers, please like the video, subscribe if you're not, hit the bell notification if you're on YouTube, because they don't send you any notifications unless you hit the bell, as far as I'm concerned. But let me know what you guys think about this. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.